Hi. So we're going to continue the rest of this chapter. And this was chapter 40? Yes, chapter 40, mid 40. So as you remember, quick recap, um, Mr. Lockton is on his way to London, much to Lady Lockton's dismay, but she gave him a list of things she wanted him to get in London. And then Isabel was going through town and she heard a loud, "Hey, you girl!" And it ended up being the guard from the British guard from the prison where Curzon is, and so he asked her if she would be interested in a job, and he said, you can help clean out the cells, and she said, "Don't know if my madam will allow that," and he said, "Tell your mistress we'd pay her the going rate for your services." So Isabel isn't going to get paid, but Madam would get paid for the work that Isabel's doing. All right, so the master left for London with much muttering on the part of his wife. She did not take to her bed as I expected, but was driven round to the home of Mrs. Taylor to play cards and, no doubt, complain about her husband. While she was gone, Sarah birthed her baby boy in the cellar. I was sore tempted to sneak down the stairs and watch. I had seen kittens and calves come out into the world, but never babies. I had a powerful curiosity about it, but I dared not. I kept water boiling for the midwife and stuck cloth in my ears to keep out the noise. When Sarah stopped hollering, I crept down the stairs to see the babe. He was a round-headed fat fellow with big eyes and bigger ears. "George," Sarah called him. "You named him after the king?" Hannah asked. "Perhaps," Sarah said cheerfully. "We never figured the colonists would hold on this long. My man was saying the other night that maybe the king should stop the war. Maybe the babe and us might stay here and not sail home. Plenty of room here," he said. She kissed the baby's nose. "A name like George is a good one on either side of the ocean." "Shh," warned Mary. The next day, Sarah and her George moved to a house set aside for new mothers attached to the army. I was sad to see them go, for I had wanted to hold the little one and make him laugh. So Sarah's thinking that George is a good name because either King George in England or George Washington in the colonies, either one would be a good name. Lady Seymour wanted to hear all the details about the new baby. I thought maybe I could visit Sarah and ask her to bring the little lad by. Something about a baby always brings old folks back to life. When I mentioned the notion to the lady, she just shook her head. "Not until the pestilence has left my lungs." A pestilence is like a virus, a bad cold. And she coughed into a stained handkerchief. "Heaven knows when that will be." Her health was changeable and flighty. One day she'd feel strong and lively, and she'd eat 3 meals and drink a gallon of tea. And then the next she'd lie in bed with a fever, looking so poorly it tempted Madam to order the coffin to be made. I went to place another log on the fire. Lady Seymour was lying propped up on pillows in her bed. She shook her head. "No more wood. I am warm enough. Please sit down, Isabel." "Ma'am?" "I would like you to sit down, either in the chair or on the edge of the bed. I should like to talk to you." It was improper for a servant to sit with the lady as though they were companions, but she asked me direct, so I sat myself in the chair that was close to the fire. I could not figure what we needed to conversate on. She hadn't sent me for a newspaper or sweets for days and days. Had I displeased her? "Thank you." And she sat back and used her right hand to place her left hand in her lap. "I will soon meet my Maker, Isabel. I am a sinner in need of forgiveness." Her Maker meaning she was going to die. I relaxed. "'Twas the pull of death that made old people go funny. Miss Mary Finch went the same way toward the end. Clouds would roll into her eyes and she would talk nonsense for hours. Me and Ruth, we just sat polite and listened. The trick with addled old folks was to be agreeable." "We all seek forgiveness, Lady Seymour," I said. "I wanted to buy you," she said. I wasn't sure I heard her right. Beg your pardon, ma'am? I tried to buy you from Anne after I first met you. She refused, and we argued like a pair of fishwives. I rather lost my temper, she chuckled. Hadn't done that for 30 years. I didn't know what to say. She studied her useless hand. When Elihu returned from exile, I should have demanded you be placed in my household. I was horrified by your treatment, and of course, your poor sister. But then the fire, and her gaze returned to the hearth. I regret I did not force the matter. You would have suited my household. It would have eased her mind if I thanked her for wanting to buy me away from Madame. I tried to be grateful, but could not. A body does not like being bought and sold like a basket of eggs, even if the person who cracks the shells is kind. Isabel? She waited for some word from me. I did not know how to explain myself. It was like talking to her maid, Angelica, who was so much like me and at the same time so much different. We two had no strings of words that could tie us together. Yes, ma'am, I said. Thank you for telling me this. And that was all I could muster. Forgive me, she said. I am a clumsy old woman. There was a shout from the drawing rooms upstairs where Colonel Hawkins and his men had been meeting. I stood. The soldier wives are all visiting Sarah. I should... Go on, said Lady Seymour, closing her eyes. Colonel Hawkins was in a right foul mood on account of all the forms he had to fill out and reports that were late. The war seemed fought with as much paper as bullets. What with the letters and the passes and permissions piled on the table, orders received and recorded, recordings of conferences noted down. When I entered, he hollered that the room was colder than a barn and called me all manner of rude words. I chose the wood for his fire very carefully, the greenest, dampest logs in the entire woodpile, guaranteed to smolder and sputter without giving off any heat and even less light. So she's giving him really bad, wet wood. After a frigid hour, he left for headquarters. It took all my might not to crack a smile. The grandfather clock ticked off the minutes. Madame would not return home for a goodly while. She was a terrible card player, but she had loads of money to lose, so her companions would keep her at the table as long as possible. I peeked in Lady Seymour's door. She was wrapped up in her coverlet and sleeping. The blankets barely moved when she took a breath. I pulled out the book Common Sense from its hiding place and read by the firelight. In truth, there were some pages that I jumped over, for I found it hard to figure out their meaning. But I gathered many of his thoughts. Americans had good cause to overthrow their British masters. A person born to wealth was not born to rule over others. And lastly, 'twas good and proper to fight injustice. I kept the mending basket close to hand in case I needed to hide my book. All right, so that's the end of that chapter. We'll probably only get halfway through this next chapter, 41. Okay, so we're now into January, like mid-January. When Madame woke the next morning, her first command was for hot scones. Scones are like pastries. Her second was that seamstress must be fetched immediately. The British commander was throwing a ball in honor of Queen Charlotte's birthday in 10 days' time. Madame required a new gown for such an occasion, perhaps even 2. I learnt of all this when I returned from the market with a fresh killed chicken. Hannah, who had taken over the boss lady's job from Sarah after the baby was born, was preparing a cherry pie. Mary sat by the window, mending one of Madame's skirts. The notion of a ball for a queen confuddled me. That's a long voyage for a celebration, I said. Hannah laughed. No, you ninny. The queen isn't coming. How could she? She's got 10 children to take care of, plus all them castles she lives in. 11, added Mary. She had a new baby last spring. Even though the queen can't come, the officers always hold a ball in her honor. Hannah said as she rolled out the pie dough. Gives them a good excuse to eat too much, drink too much, and make proper fools of themselves while dancing. I pulled out the feather bag and a basin. And Madame Lockton is attending this ball? The colonel will be her escort. Mary bit her thread in two. All the rich folk will be there. I ripped a handful of feathers from the chicken and stuffed them in the bag. Does Madame require anything of us? Not yet, Hannah said carefully, laying the dough in the pie plate. That will change, though, no doubt. I seen the Queen herself, you know, Mary said, squinting at her stitches. With your own eyes? Asked Hannah. I don't believe you. Well, I seen her carriage, and she was in it. The backside of the carriage, mind, actually the backside of the troops guarding the backside of the carriage. But I saw the wheels, bent down to it, and she threaded another needle. Bet you don't know her name. Her Majesty, said Hannah. Proves you're not a Londoner, Mary said. Her proper name is Her Majesty Queen Charlotte of Great Britain, Duchess Sophia Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. How do you remember all them names when you can't remember 1 minute to the next how much salt goes into the biscuits? Asked Hannah. Biscuits are not as important as the Queen. I practiced her name from the time I was a young girl, case the day ever come that she saw me on the street, and I could call out her entire gracious name. If I did that, her carriage would stop, and she'd make me a lady-in-waiting on account of my good manners. There was a moment of silence while the two women considered this, then a loud outburst as they nearly fell over themselves in laughter. After dinner, Lady Seymour had a frightful seizure of the apoplexy. Looked just like one of Ruth's fits, except not with so much shaking. She fell into a sleep so deep I thought she was stone dead. But every so often she'd take a deep breath, and once she even opened her eyes. When she woke the next morning, she could not speak nor move her legs. Dr. Dostuge arrived and bled her and stuck pins in her limbs and gave her bitter tea. In truth, there was nothing that could make her better. I was told to tend to her again as I had right after the fire. I fed her and held the teacup to her lips and wiped her chin when she dribbled and helped her with the chamber pot business. This last was most distressing for her, and she cried. Then I wiped the tears from her face. I heard Madame ask the doctor plain when the old lady would die. The doctor could not answer her. I figured Madame wanted Lady Seymour to die as soon as possible, but not before the Queen's ball. If the house was in mourning, it wouldn't be proper for Madame to dance with the Admiral and make merry. A week before the ball, Madame ordered that Lady Seymour be moved to the parlor bedchamber downstairs so she could reclaim the largest bedchamber for herself. After two privates had carried the lady down, and she was propped up on her pillows so she could look out the window, Madame called me upstairs. I want this room aired and the linens boiled, girl. It smells of decay in here. The work of the day was simple and heavy. Strip the bed, haul down the linens for washing, clean out the hearth, open the windows and wash them inside and out, take the rugs down and beat them in the yard, sweep and mop the floor, take the rugs back in, close the windows, and give all the wood a polish. When the chamber was clean, Madame told me to open the windows again and let them stand open all afternoon to make sure there was no lingering pestilence in the air. I did as I was told. The doctor came right before supper and gave Lady Seymour a potion that would make the night pass quickly for her. When she was ready for bed, Madame called for me to bring up a warming pan filled with coals and run it between the sheets because they were chilled and still a wee bit damp. I did what she asked, then returned to the kitchen, dumped the coals in the hearth, and crept under my own blanket. She called for me again. The sheets were still too cold for her liking. I refilled the warming pan, carried it up the stairs, and warmed her bed. Then I stroked the fire in her hearth before returning down the stairs. The third time she called for me, I was sore tempted to dump the glowing coals onto her bed, let it blaze, and ask if that was warm enough. But I did not. I performed the task she gave me, and when she called a quarter hour later, I did it again. oh, she's mean.